Alright, so for this final stretch of Transformers Prime episodes, I actually did something I usually don't do when I'm doing one of these series, and it's a thing that I might need to start doing more often, frankly. I haven't rewatched the movie yet, the movie that acted as a finale for the series. But I did go and I watched the rest of the final season, and I remembered more of it than I expected I would. And I was also reminded of where exactly some plot threads go, and proven correct about some of them where I'd hoped that I wouldn't be. But before I start whinging about that, which I am going to do in this review, sorry, I did enjoy it. I did enjoy watching the rest of the season. Quite a lot, actually. It was good. It was just not as good as I feel it could have been. That said, I'm going to be speaking in this review to where some of this stuff is going to go. And I just want to let you guys know I'm not talking out my butt this time. I am, in fact, working off of terrible 2-week-old memories rather than terrible several years old memories for once. That said, today's Transformers Prime episode, Project Predacon, is one of this show's patented re-establishment of the status quo episodes. And it's really the last one we get, honestly, because basically every episode from this point forward pretty organically shakes up the status quo in at least some small way or another. But this one does at least give us a status quo, a jumping off point for the rest of this season to jump off of, even going so far as to show us Optimus scanning a vehicle mode that's appropriate for his new body. And they even drop in a reference to another Hasbro show, Mask, here, which I honestly wasn't expecting. Because, I know there are people who remember Mask fairly fondly, and I had some of the toys when I was a kid. But it wasn't great, right? That said, we're shown a lot of stuff here. We get to see the Autobots finishing up establishing their new base, which is in the building where Fowler's working. We get to see what they were able to salvage from the old base, which really isn't much. We're told that they're having trouble finding Energon, which actually that's what Optimus is up to at the start of this episode. After he gets his new vehicle mode, he heads off to scout a Decepticon operation that they've found, hoping that it's an Energon mine that the Autobots can swoop in and steal all the Energon from, only for it to turn out to be some Insecticons digging for more Predacon fossils so they can clone more Predacons, which is how the Autobots get clued into the fact that the Decepticons are cloning Predacons. We're shown the post-crunch time dynamic between Wheeljack and Ultra Magnus. After Wheeljack does another excruciatingly stupid and reckless thing, Ultra Magnus basically tells him if he can't stop being a reckless liability, he's welcome to GTFO. And does so while basically calling him a coward. And Wheeljack doesn't even argue back. He just takes it and says, man, if I still had my ship, I'd do that. Like they're definitely setting up for stuff here. But, just based on the scene, Magnus is absolutely in the right. We also get confirmation that Magnus is Optimus's second in command at this point. Just permanently now. He even starts wielding the power-drained forge at this point, going forward. Referencing back to animated Ultra Magnus, who had a big frickin' hammer. And we're given the history of the Predacons and why their fossils are being found on Earth. The Autobots give us some of it, and the Decepticons give it the rest, because the Autobots don't know all of it. It's actually handled really well. Basically, in the Transformers Prime universe, a lot of old Earth creature myths are based on Predacons who existed here at some point, died, and became fossils that the Decepticons are now digging up to create their cloned army. And they were only here in the first place because back during the war, when there were Cybertronian outposts on other planets, Megatron had Shockwave clone original Predacons, make a bunch of clones out of them, and then send them off to those outposts, including Earth. And it was those clones that died and became the fossils that they're using in their cloning process now. It's a little convoluted, really more concerned with getting us to this final arc of episodes than it is with making actual logical sense, but it's fine. It's no more outlandish than any other plot point in a Transformers show, I guess. And now we have our plot, at least for a couple of episodes. The Autobots are going to monitor Decepticon activity enough that they're going to try to head them off at the pass, so to speak, when they head out to find more of these fossils. Try to get the fossils first, because I guess you can only use each fossil once for some reason. Even though it only takes a single strand of CNA, the Transformers equivalent of DNA, to make one of these clones, you can't just take a big hunkin' fossil and clone it a bunch of times. But this is so we get a variety of different, fairly unique Predacons that can be sold as part of the toy line. Don't want a bunch of copies. These guys aren't generic enough to be army builders like the Vehicons. We also get some character development here for Smokescreen, too. He rolls in with a new paint job, saying that he was following Optimus and Bumblebee's example. And he gets a little snippy under his breath when he's told off for wasting his time on that. Mentions that he could have been a Prime. And when he's confronted about it, he makes up a different story. He lies about it. And that's basically the last Smokescreen character development we ever get. Like, he does stuff in coming episodes, for sure. And there's some lip service paid to additional development later in this episode, where he's talking to Bumblebee, and he reaches the point where he accepts that even though he now wants to be a Prime, he has to wait for the right time. He has to be patient. But that's literally what happened when he decided to resurrect Optimus instead of becoming a Prime in Optimus's stead. He already did that. This isn't really development. It's here to facilitate exposition about Bumblebee and how Bumblebee has chosen to remain scout rank rather than becoming a full-fledged warrior, because he's hoping that they'll be able to retake Cybertron and he can be promoted there because it would mean more to him. And let me just say right now, I was right. My memory of them effectively taking what seemed to be the storyline that Smokescreen was going to get here at the end of the show and giving it to Bumblebee, like, I was right about that. That is what happens. And so, as I've said before, the end of Smokescreen's arc being that he has to accept that he's not the chosen one and just live his life, like, that would have been fine. Except that the storyline that they seem to be building towards with him does still happen in the show. It just happens to this other character who never got any of the development leading up to it. It would have made perfect sense giving it to Smokescreen, but it comes out of nowhere when given to Bumblebee. And that's my problem with it. If they just didn't want to do that storyline at all because of how cliche it is and end Smokescreen's seeming chosen one arc in a different, less predictable way, that would have been fine, but they still do that storyline too. It's not fair to this character who got so much great development over the course of his time on the show. And again, he does do stuff in coming episodes. It's good that he's here. He works in the story. He does stuff that other characters wouldn't have been able to or wouldn't have thought to do. So it's not like they just forget about him completely from this point forward. But I don't know. It feels like he's an afterthought. Whenever he does anything important from this point forward, it really does feel like they wrote the situation specifically so that they'd have an excuse to use him. Does that make sense? Like, it feels like if they had written things just slightly differently, a different character could have done whatever he ends up doing. It's hard to explain. Hopefully you'll see what I mean in upcoming reviews. And I don't hate his role in the rest of the season or anything. And it's not even like he's my favorite character or anything either. It's not like I'm standing the guy. I just feel like if they were going to build him up to this point, they should have just kept building until they were finished. Right? The rest of the episode is more or less eaten up with the Autobots heading out to try to secure one of these fossils ahead of the Decepticons. With the story treating Optimus in his new form very much like Beast Wars, treated Optimal Optimus in its final season. Optimus is so big and powerful now that he's effectively a force in and of himself. So he feels justified in splitting off from whatever group he's with to enhance their chances of successfully locating whatever it is they're locating, because he can handle himself entirely solo now. But this creates a little bit of drama here and there where he's separated from the other characters and has to get back to them in time, or he's ambushed by somebody who, maybe it's Soundwave, who's better in the air than he is, has more experience flying and fighting than he does, which is a thing that happens in this episode, and so he'll get incapacitated temporarily. But then he comes back just in time to swoop in and almost save the day. He almost saves the day in this one. The Decepticons ended up winning. They get what they needed. But he almost came through. It was really a toss-up. And while that does make things tense in a way that they haven't been up to this point, like again, this is basically how they treated Optimus, Beast Optimus, in the final season of Beast Wars. I've seen this already. So when Bumblebee and the Smokescreen are going up against Shockwave, who is quite literally a tank, and they're doing well, but it's clear that they're not really winning, I wasn't ever really worried. The tension never really set in for me, because I knew exactly how they were going to end up using Optimus to shift the momentum of that fight. Because I've seen it already. And I know it's unfair to fault this show for following in the footsteps of another great Transformers show, but I just can't help but say it. If they hadn't brought back Optimus, yet at least, and had instead given us a new Prime who was less experienced and roughly only on par with Optimus's original form in terms of power, then they could have made this scene tense in ways that weren't predictable to a long-term fan of this franchise. Like, it's not bad. The action sequence here isn't bad or anything. I want to stress that. But it really does feel like a little microcosm of this show overall. It's not bad and is in fact quite good. But it really could have been better. But in the end, the Decepticons do end up with the material that they need to start cloning another Predacon. And Megatron tells Shockwave that maybe he shouldn't go out in the field again since he's the only one who can do this, putting him to work effectively full-time on this project, so we should expect to see more of these things relatively soon, which is a pretty exciting place to end the episode on. So while I don't think this episode is a masterpiece by any stretch, it is still good. It's still a fun one to watch, despite having to set up so many things. It does this kind of story as well as I would expect an episode of Transformers Prime to do. All of that said, what do you guys think of the Transformers Prime episode, Project Predacon, if you have seen it? Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below. And while you're down there, you might as well like the video, share it with anyone else you think would enjoy my content, subscribe if you haven't. You can also check out links to my various social media as well as the many ways you can help out the channel. Those will be in the video description, but either way, this has been AJ22, and I will talk to you guys later.